Most people take a DNA test because they are curious. They want to know what percentage of them is Irish or Nigerian or Eastern European. They want to see a map light up with little colored regions. They want something interesting to bring up at a dinner party. That is usually what it is. A curiosity, a conversation starter, a fun little window into history. But sometimes, not often, not even close to often, a DNA test opens a door that was never supposed to be closed in the first place. And what is on the other side of that door is not a percentage or a region on a map. It is a person. A real, living, breathing person who has been out there the entire time, just on the other side of an absence neither of them fully understood. This is the story of two women who took a DNA test for completely different reasons and found each other completely by accident. And what happened when they met, what they said in that first conversation, what they discovered about the years they had missed, and what they chose to do with the rest of their lives, is something that people who heard it said they will not forget for a long time. Before we get into it, if you are new here, please subscribe right now and hit the like button. This channel exists to find the stories that remind us what human beings are actually capable of, the love, the resilience, the connections that survive things that should have ended them. Those stories deserve to reach people. Subscribe, turn on the notifications, and let's go. Now, let's start at the beginning. And to understand the beginning, we have to go back 62 years to a hospital in Cincinnati, Ohio, to a woman who had a decision made for her before she was old enough to understand what was being decided. Her name was Carol Ann Briggs. She was 17 years old in the spring of 1962, and she was alone in a way that teenagers today would find almost impossible to imagine. The boy who was the father had disappeared. Her own father, a strict and deeply religious man who ran his household like a set of rules written in stone, had made it clear that there was only one acceptable path forward. The baby would be given up. That was it. There was no discussion. There was no other option presented. There was just the path forward decided by someone else, and Carol Ann was expected to walk it. She spent the last months of her pregnancy at a home for unwed mothers in Cincinnati. She has described it in interviews as a place that was not unkind, but was not warm either. It was functional. It was designed to process a situation that society had decided was a problem and move everyone through it as efficiently and invisibly as possible. The girls there did not talk much about what came before. They did not talk much about what came after. They existed in a kind of in-between that had its own quiet rules. Carol Ann gave birth on a Tuesday in November 1962. A girl. She held her for 45 minutes. She has said in every interview since that she counted. She knew the time was going to be short, so she counted every minute, 45 of them. Then they took the baby away, and Carol Ann went back to her parents' house and nobody ever spoke about it again. She carried that silence for 60 years. She married, had 2 more children, sons, both of them. Built a life in a suburb of Dayton, Ohio, where she worked as a bookkeeper for 30 years and sang in her church choir and was known as a dependable, warm, quietly funny woman who always remembered people's birthdays and never once in all those years stopped wondering where her daughter was. She never searched, not officially, not with any real commitment to finding something. The shame her father had installed in her was deep and durable, and even after he died, even after her sons were grown and she had become a grandmother herself, some part of her still believed she did not have the right, that she had forfeited something by being 17 and alone and not strong enough to fight for a different outcome. In 2022, her grandson Tyler, 23, tech-savvy, always looking for a project, convinced her to do a DNA ancestry test for Christmas. He ordered the kit. He sent it in for her. He was excited about the results the way young people get excited about things they do not yet understand the full weight of. Carol Ann did not tell him about the baby. She had not told anyone about the baby, not her sons, not her late husband, not a single person outside of the people who had been present in that room in Cincinnati in 1962. She spat in the tube. She mailed it in. She told herself it was just a curiosity and tried to believe it. Now let's go to the other side of this story. Sandra Louise Kowalski was born in November 1962 in Cincinnati, Ohio. She was adopted at 3 days old by Frank and Helen Kowalski, a couple in their early 30s from Cleveland who had been trying to have children for 6 years and had finally turned to adoption after running out of other options. They were good people. Not perfect, nobody is, but good. Frank was a machinist. Helen was a homemaker who threw herself into motherhood with the full force of everything she had been saving up during those 6 childless years. Sandra grew up loved. She grew up in a stable house with a yard and a dog named Biscuit, and a mother who made her lunches with notes inside, and a father who taught her to ride a bike and caught her when she fell without making her feel bad about falling. She knew she was adopted. Kowalskis had decided early on that they would tell her and tell her young, before the revelation could become a wound. They sat her down when she was 5 years old and explained in the simple, careful words you use with a 5-year-old that she had grown in another woman's belly, but she had always been meant to be their daughter. Sandra had looked at them for a long moment and then asked if she could have a snack. And that, as far as she was concerned at 5 years old, was that. But it was not that. Not fully. Not as she grew older. The question that grew in Sandra as she got older was not angry. It was not resentful. She loved the Kowalskis completely, and that never wavered. But there was a quieter question underneath the love. A question that showed up most often in medical offices when doctors asked about family history and she had to say she did not know. Or in mirrors when she looked at her own face and could not trace any of its features to any face she had ever been shown. Or in moments of difficulty when she wondered whether the way she handled hard things, the particular texture of her resilience, had come from somewhere she would never be able to visit. She looked into the adoption records twice, once in her 30s, once in her 40s. Ohio had complicated laws around sealed adoption records during that era, and both attempts ended in walls she could not get past. She was not given a name. She was not given a location. She was given a form letter that said the records were sealed, and that was that. Sandra put the search down both times. She had a life. She had a career. She was a pediatric occupational therapist in Pittsburgh, a job she had chosen, she said, because she wanted to help children who were struggling to make sense of a world that was not designed to fit them. She had a daughter of her own, Rebecca, who was now 34. She had friends and a small house she loved, and a garden she was proud of, and enough good things in her life that the absence of an answer did not hollow her out. But it was always there, not loud, just there. In 2021, Rebecca ordered a DNA ancestry kit as a gift for Sandra's birthday. Sandra took it not because she expected anything, but because Rebecca was excited about it, and Sandra was the kind of mother who matched her daughter's excitement about things even when the excitement was not entirely her own. She mailed the kit in. She waited. She told herself it was just a curiosity. 11 months later, on a Wednesday afternoon in February 2023, Sandra Kowalski sat down at her kitchen table in Pittsburgh and opened the results on her laptop. The ancestry breakdown was interesting. She was more Polish than she expected, which made sense given her adoptive last name was Kowalski, though that had always been a coincidence. Some Irish, some German, a small percentage that traced back to Scandinavia. And then there was the DNA matches section. There was a name at the top of the list, listed as a close family match. The kind of match the platform uses specific language for, the kind of language that means parent, child, or sibling. The name was Carol Ann Briggs. Sandra stared at the screen for a long time. She has said she does not know exactly how long. It could have been 5 minutes. It could have been 20. Time did a strange thing in that moment. It went soft around the edges the way it does when something happens that your mind needs a little extra time to catch up to. She read the match category again, close family. She clicked through to the profile. There was a small photo. A woman in her late 70s, smiling at what looked like a backyard gathering, silver-haired, warm eyes, wearing a cardigan the color of a late afternoon sky. Sandra closed the laptop. She made herself a cup of tea. She sat back down. She opened the laptop again. She composed a message to Carol Ann Briggs 17 times before she sent one. She has kept all 17 drafts. She has said they form a kind of emotional archaeology, each one a layer of how she was feeling in those 2 hours, getting closer and closer to the truth of what she actually wanted to say and further from the version that tried to protect them both from the weight of it. The message she finally sent was 4 sentences long. She introduced herself. She mentioned that the DNA match had come up as a close family connection. She said she had been adopted in Cincinnati in November 1962. And she said, as gently and as plainly as she could manage, that she was not looking to disrupt anyone's life. She was just wondering if Carol Ann might have any information that could help her understand where she came from. She pressed send. She shut the laptop again. She called Rebecca and could not quite explain what she had just done. Carol Ann received the message 4 days later. She has said she did not see it right away because she was not in the habit of checking the Ancestry app. Tyler had set it up for her on her phone, and she kept forgetting it existed. She was sitting in her car in the parking lot of a grocery store when she opened it. She had just finished shopping. She had bags in the back seat. She was about to drive home. She read the message once. Then she put the phone face down on the passenger seat and sat in that parking lot for 40 minutes. The groceries were still in the back seat. Milk going warm. She did not notice. Carol Ann has spoken about those 40 minutes. She has said they contained a lifetime of things. 60 years of a question she had never allowed herself to ask out loud suddenly becoming something she had to answer. The terror of a door opening that she had kept sealed for so long she had almost forgotten it was a door. And underneath the terror, underneath all of it, a feeling she could not name at first. A warmth. Small but undeniable. Like a pilot light that had been burning so low for so long that she had almost stopped knowing it was there, and suddenly the gas was turned up and it flickered into something she recognized. She picked the phone up. She read the message again, and she typed back. Her reply was also short. She said, "I think I might be the person you are looking for. I have been hoping for a very long time that you were okay." Sandra received that reply on a Tuesday morning. She read it standing in her kitchen before work, still in her coat. She did not make it to work that day. The two women exchanged messages for 2 weeks before they spoke on the phone. They were careful with each other the way you are careful with something that matters, not distant, just gentle. They learned each other's shapes before they tried to hold the full weight of each other's stories. Carol Ann told Sandra about the home for unwed mothers, about the 45 minutes, about the 60 years of silence she had kept. She told her about the husband who never knew, the sons who never knew, the grandsons who had accidentally started all of this with a Christmas gift. She said, "I need you to know that giving you up was not something I chose freely. I need you to know that I held you for every one of those 45 minutes." Sandra told Carol Ann about the Kowalskis, about Frank and Helen, about Biscuit the dog and the notes in the lunchbox and the 2 searches that had hit walls. She told her about becoming a pediatric occupational therapist and choosing that career because she wanted to help children who were trying to make sense of a world that did not quite fit them. She said, "I want you to know I had a good life. I want you to know that the people who raised me were good. I am not coming to you with a wound. I am coming to you with a question." And then she asked it. After 2 weeks of careful messages and 1 long phone call, she asked the question that had lived in her quietly for 6 decades. She said, "What was she like? Your family? What were you like? What is in me that came from you?" Carol Ann was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You have my mother's hands. I can tell from your photo, long fingers, and I think you have my stubbornness. The way you wrote to me, careful but not afraid, that's mine. I recognize it." Sandra laughed, and Carol Ann laughed. And for the first time in 60 years, that particular laugh was shared between the 2 people who were always supposed to share it. They decided to meet in person. They chose a city halfway between Dayton and Pittsburgh, Columbus, Ohio. They chose a small restaurant, not too loud, not too crowded. They chose a Thursday afternoon in April 2023 because Thursdays felt to both of them independently like a day for real things. Sandra arrived first. She sat at a corner table and ordered water and watched the door. Carol Ann walked in 7 minutes later. She was wearing a blue cardigan. She spotted Sandra immediately, not from the photos, though she had seen the photos, but from something else, from a recognition that did not come through the eyes, the kind that is older than that. She walked to the table. Sandra stood up. They looked at each other for a moment. And then Carol Ann said very quietly, "There you are." Sandra said, "Here I am." They held each other in the middle of that restaurant for a long time. The other diners noticed. Most of them looked away, the way people look away from something too private to witness. A few of them did not look away. A few of them watched and felt something shift in the room and did not fully understand why. The lunch lasted 4 hours. They did not talk the whole time. Sometimes they just sat and looked at each other in the way you look at something you have been trying to picture for a long time and are now finally seeing in 3 dimensions. It is a specific kind of looking, searching and satisfied at the same time. Carol Ann brought a photograph album. Not everything, just a few pages she had put together. Pictures of herself at 17 before the pregnancy, laughing at something off camera. Pictures of her parents, now both gone. A photo of her mother, Sandra's grandmother, sitting in a garden, hands in her lap, long fingers extended exactly the way Sandra's rested on the table right now. Sandra stared at that photograph for a long time. She turned her own hands over. She put them next to the image. Carol Ann watched her do it and pressed her lips together and said nothing. Sandra brought things too. A photo of Frank and Helen Kowalski at her college graduation, beaming. A picture of Rebecca as a baby. A picture of Sandra herself at 8 years old, sitting on the front steps of the house in Cleveland with Biscuit the dog, grinning at the camera with an expression of pure, uncomplicated happiness. Carol Ann held that picture for a long time, too. She touched the edge of it with 1 finger. She said, "You were happy." Sandra said, "I was happy. I really was." Carol Ann let out a breath that she had perhaps been holding for 60 years, just a quiet exhalation. But Sandra heard what was in it and reached across the table and took her hand. The conversation went everywhere. They talked about Carol Ann's sons, Sandra's half-brothers, and how Carol Ann was going to tell them. They talked about Rebecca, Sandra's daughter, and what a reunion would look like for a family that was discovering itself from scratch. They talked about the DNA test in Tyler and the grocery store parking lot and all the small, mundane accidents that had somehow added up to this Thursday afternoon in Columbus, Ohio. At one point, Carol Ann said something that became, in later retellings, the line people remembered most. She said, "I made peace a long time ago with not knowing if you were okay. I had to. It was the only way I could keep going, but I never made peace with not knowing you. Those are two different things. Making peace with the not knowing is survival. But the not knowing you, that was just a loss I carried every single day." Sandra did not say anything for a moment. Then she said, "I know. I think I carried the same thing from the other side. I did not know what I was missing, but I knew something was missing, and now I know what it was." Carol Ann told her about the 45 minutes. She told the whole story, the home, the decision that was not really a decision, the numbering of every minute. She said, "I want you to know that when I had to give you back, I memorized your face. I did not know what that meant then. I was 17 and I did not have the words for it, but I did it. I memorized you." Sandra said, "And now you don't have to rely on the memory anymore." Carol Ann laughed, the kind of laugh that has tears in it. She said, "No, now I don't." They exchanged numbers before they left the restaurant. They stood on the sidewalk in the mild April afternoon and hugged again. This time it was different from the first hug in the restaurant. The first hug had been relief. This one was something else. A beginning, the particular warmth of something that is just starting rather than just ending. Carol Ann said, "I have a lot to figure out, telling my sons, explaining everything. It is not going to be simple." Sandra said, "Take whatever time you need. I have waited 62 years. I can wait a little longer." Carol Ann shook her head. She said, "No more waiting. We have done enough of that." She told her sons that weekend. She sat them down the same way good parents sit their children down when something true and important needs to be said. She told them all of it. The home in Cincinnati, the 45 minutes, the silence she had kept for 60 years, the DNA match, the Thursday lunch in Columbus. Her older son, David, was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Mom, you carried that by yourself for 60 years. She said, "I did." He said, "You should have told us. We would have helped you carry it." That, Carol Ann later said, broke something open in her that she had not known was still sealed. Not in a bad way. In the way that something breaks open when it is ready to be released. The story became public not because Carol Ann or Sandra chose to make it public, but because Rebecca, Sandra's daughter, posted a short message on social media about finding her grandmother. She had not planned for it to spread. She was just sharing something that had made her happy with the people who followed her. It spread anyway, the way things do when they carry something real. Within a week, the post had been shared thousands of times. People wrote in the comments about their own adoption stories, their own DNA test surprises, their own losses and reunions and rooms full of people they were just learning how to be in. A woman in Georgia wrote that she had found 3 siblings through a DNA test and that this story had finally given her the words for what that experience had felt like. A man in Oregon wrote that he was adopted and had never searched and that reading this had made him rethink that decision. A mother who had given up a child in the 1980s wrote simply, "I hope she is okay. I have always hoped she is okay." That last comment had 40,000 likes. A television producer reached out. A documentary filmmaker reached out. Several podcasts reached out. Carol Ann and Sandra talked it over, the two of them, on the phone the way they were already in the habit of doing, and decided they would do one interview. One careful, considered conversation with someone who would let them tell it in their own words at their own pace. They were not interested in spectacle. They were interested in accuracy. In telling the truth of it without letting anyone else's idea of what the story should be overwrite what the story actually was. The interview aired on a Sunday evening in September 2023. 2 women sitting across from each other in a small studio, talking about 60 years of parallel lives in 45 minutes and a DNA test and a grocery store parking lot. No dramatic music, no recreations, just the 2 of them and their own words. 12 million people watched it. Not because it was dramatic in the conventional sense, but because it was true in the way that very few things on television manage to be true. The interviewer asked Sandra what she wished people understood about growing up adopted. Sandra said, "I want people to understand that you can be deeply loved by the people who raise you and still carry a question about the people who made you. Those 2 things are not in conflict. The love I had for Frank and Helen was complete. The question I had about my birth mother was also complete. 2 complete things can exist at the same time in the same person. It took me a long time to understand that and to stop feeling guilty about it." The interviewer asked Carol Ann what she wished she had done differently. Carol Ann was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I wish I had believed sooner that I had the right to want to know her. My father made me feel like I had given up that right, and I believed him for too long." I let his shame become my shame, and I wore it for 60 years, and that was time I could have spent differently. Not searching necessarily, but at least not hiding. Not pretending the 45 minutes had not happened. She said the 45 minutes always happened. No amount of silence changes that, and I think I always knew it. I just needed someone to give me permission to say it out loud. The interviewer asked them both, "What do you want for the future? What does this look like now?" They looked at each other. There was a brief conversation in that look, the shorthand that people develop when they know each other, still new between them but already present. Sandra spoke first. She said, "I want Christmases. I want to know her sons and for Rebecca to know her cousins. I want ordinary things. I want to sit in her kitchen and have coffee and talk about nothing important. I have had enough of the important conversations for a while. I want the boring ones now. The everyday ones. Those are the ones I missed." Carol Ann said, "She wants my potato soup recipe. I promised her my potato soup recipe and I am going to give it to her. My mother's recipe, the one she never got to taste. That is what I want. I want to feed her the things she should have grown up eating." In the months that followed the interview, Carol Ann and Sandra settled into exactly what Sandra had described. Ordinary things. Phone calls that were not about the big story but about the small daily texture of each other's lives. A visit to Dayton where Sandra met David and his family and sat at Carol Ann's kitchen table and had the potato soup. A visit to Pittsburgh where Carol Ann met Rebecca and saw the house Sandra had built and the garden she was proud of. Rebecca, 20 years younger than her mother, became close with Tyler, Carol Ann's grandson who had started all of this with a Christmas DNA kit. They found between them a particular humor about the whole thing. Tyler had given his grandmother a gift that had reorganized her entire family. He had been aiming for a fun conversation starter. He had accidentally found Sandra an entire branch of herself. He said, in a short video he posted online, which also went viral, "I just wanted to know if we were secretly Vikings. We are a little bit Viking for what it's worth." But mostly what we found was a whole other part of our family that we did not know was out there. And I think that is maybe better than being Vikings. Slightly. Carol Ann's sons, David and Michael, both said something similar in different ways. David said, "I grew up knowing I had one sibling and now I have two. It is just more family. And more family when the family is good is only ever a good thing." He paused, and then he said, "She taught us that. Our whole lives, Mom taught us that. More love is always better than less. She just had not applied that rule to herself yet." Michael, the quieter of the two, said simply, "I am glad she found her. I am glad they found each other. And I am glad my mother does not have to carry that by herself anymore. That is all I have ever wanted for her. For the things she carried to feel lighter." At their first Christmas together, the two families gathered at Carol Ann's house in Dayton. 14 people around a table that required 2 folding tables pushed against it to fit everyone. Carol Ann made the potato soup. Sandra had learned the recipe by then and helped. Rebecca brought a pie. Tyler brought wine and a copy of the original DNA results, framed, which made everyone laugh. After dinner, when the children had gone to watch something in the other room and the adults were sitting with their coffee and the remains of dessert, Carol Ann said something that nobody was expecting. She said, "I want to say something, and I want all of you to hear it." The table went quiet. She said, "I spent 60 years being ashamed of the best thing I ever did. And the best thing I ever did was bring this woman into the world. I was 17 and I was alone and I did not get to keep her. But I gave her 45 minutes and I memorized her face and I let her go into a world that, as it turns out, was good to her. And I am proud of that. I am finally, after 60 years, proud of that." She looked at Sandra. She said, "You are the best thing." Sandra, who had held it together through the interview and the first meeting and most of the months in between, put her face in her hands and wept. And 14 people around a table in Dayton, Ohio, sat with her in it. Because that is what a family does with something that has finally come home after a very long time away. They make room for it. They sit with it. They let it be what it is. There is something worth sitting with in this story. Something beyond the reunion, beyond the DNA test, beyond the 45 minutes and the 60 years of silence. It is this. Both of these women had made peace, real, functional, livable peace with not knowing. They had built full lives. They had loved people and been loved by people and contributed good things to the world and managed their particular absences with grace and dignity. They were not broken. They were not waiting to be rescued. And then something found them anyway, something small and accidental and completely outside their control. A Christmas gift, a DNA kit, a grandson who wanted to know if he was secretly a Viking, and it turned out that making peace with not knowing and actually finding out are two different gifts. You can have one without the other. Carol Ann and Sandra each had the first kind of gift for decades. They were okay. They really were. But the second kind, the actually finding out, the Thursday lunch in Columbus, the potato soup recipe, the Christmas table that needed 2 folding tables to fit everyone, that is something else entirely. That is not rescue. It is not completion. It is addition. It is more. More love, more history, more faces that share your features, more people who will sit with you when something finally comes home. Carol Ann said it best in the simplest possible terms at the end of the television. The interviewer asked her if she had a message for anyone who might be watching who is in a similar situation, someone who gave up a child, or who was given up, or who is carrying a question they have not been brave enough to ask yet. Carol Ann looked straight at the camera. She said, "If the door is there, open it. I know it is scary. I know you have been managing the closed door for a long time and it has become familiar. But what is on the other side of that door is not going to destroy the life you built. It is going to add to it. There is more room in a life than you think there is. Open the door. There is someone in your life, or there is a door in your life that you have been not opening for a long time, not because you are a coward, but because life got busy and the timing was never right and some part of you got used to the closed version of things. Maybe it is a relationship that went quiet. Maybe it is a question you have been afraid to ask. Maybe it is a conversation you have been putting off because you do not know how it will go. You do not have to wait for a DNA test to open it. You can just open it. Today. Before the timing is right, before you have the perfect words, before you feel ready. Because Carol Ann waited 60 years for ready and ready never came. What came instead was a grandson with a Christmas gift and a grocery store parking lot and 40 minutes sitting with milk going warm in the back seat. Open the door. There is more room than you think. If this story meant something to you today, if it reminded you of someone, if it made you want to reach out, if it gave you something to think about, please share it. These stories deserve to reach more people. And if you are not subscribed yet, do it right now. Hit the like button. Turn on the bell. This channel exists to find the moments that remind us what we are capable of, and stories like this one are exactly why. Subscribe now, and we will see you in the next one.